Okay, we're going to start. 6 o'clock. My name is Evan Weiner. I've been here before. My background is radio and TV. I started a radio career in 1971 at the age of 15. Also a newspaper career. I've been on MSNBC, ABC News, and a whole bunch of others. But this particular talk came out of my daughter went to Rye Country Day School. And one of her classmates was a kid by the name of Connor Hartman, whose father, you might recognize the name if you watch Good Morning America, David Hartman. So David and I are talking one day, and I said, "What you up to?" He said, "I'm looking for funding." I said, "Funding for what?" He says, "I want to do a PBS program on the streets of New York." I'm not going to get into all of David's negotiations with PBS and also WEAT in Washington, D.C. looking for funding. But the basic thing was, I'm going to take a street and I am going to go, say 42nd Street, from the East River to the Hudson River, or Broadway from the Bronx down to the Battery. Sounds like a great idea. And they said no. Now, eventually, one of his partners, Barry Lewis, did get some form of that show on PBS, but David never did. So this is kind of homage to David, who's down in North Carolina now. Thank you for the idea, David, and hope you will appreciate seeing this, if you ever do. Anyway, that's Federal Hall. It's an important place. George Washington took his oath of office. The first president under the United States Constitution to be recognized as President of the United States. There were 14 people before him who were President of the United States, going back to a guy named Hamlin, and then there was John Hancock and a whole bunch of others. But anyway, George Washington is the first President of the United States under the U.S. Constitution. Well, it's Peter Stuyvesant. And I spoke on cruise ships, and that's down in Phillipsburg, St. Martin. And Peter Stuyvesant actually started his North American career down there. Eventually, he would come up to New York, which wasn't called New York in those days. It was New Amsterdam. But he is buried in New York. He became a New Yorker even after the Dutch lost New York. And he never saw this cruise ship coming out of Lower Manhattan, and actually this one is from Cape Liberty across the way in New Jersey, heading under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. There it is, going through the bridge. Anyway, nor did he see that, Lower Manhattan, and this, of course, long after the World Trade Center came down. There's David Hartman, and there is my wife. And again, it was David Hartman's idea to do a TV show. I'm going to ask you a question. Would you have watched the TV show about the streets of New York?
Yes.
PBS didn't think you would. PBS didn't think so. New York City was founded in 1624. Lower Manhattan was a trading post populated by the colonists of the Dutch Republic and named New Amsterdam after, I guess, Old Amsterdam, or just plain old Amsterdam, in 1626. By the way, the cruise ship industry is really upset at the Dutch now because they want to get rid of the cruise ships in Amsterdam. They feel that they're just clogging up the water. In 1664, New Amsterdam came under English control, and it was named New York after King Charles II. I think they have a new Charles, don't they now? King Charles III. Anyway, King Charles II of England granted the lands to his brother. That was a nice little gift, right? Give it to his brother, Duke of York. New York served as the capital of the United States from 1785 until 1790. It's been the country's biggest city since 1790. A great deal of that credit has to go to Alexander Hamilton. And I don't know, how many of you paid a lot of money to see Hamilton? Nobody? Yeah, well, Alexander Hamilton wanted the grandeur of New York and got it. And Washington says, "See ya" at this place, Francis Tavern. It's at 54 Pearl Street, corner of Broad Street. The location played a prominent role in history before, during, and after the American Revolution, serving as the headquarters for George Washington, a venue for peace negotiations with the British, and housing federal offices in the early republic. Kind of interesting that it's also a tavern, right? So you get done with your day's work of legislating and retire and have a few drinks. After British troops evacuated New York on November 25th, back in 1783, the tavern hosted a week later an elaborate turtle feast dinner. That was December 4th in the building's long room for General George Washington, where he said, "Goodbye, farewell. I haven't seen Martha in a long time. I want to go down to Mount Vernon. I just want to hang out and run my plantation. You guys are on your own." Well, maybe not. Oh, by the way, ever want to see Hamilton for nothing? Go here, the Hamilton Custom House. It's part of the Smithsonian. That was run down at one point when I was a little kid in the 1960s. It has been restored beautifully, but get there before Sunday, because if there's a government shutdown, that place is going to be closed. The last exhibit I saw there was a Native American exhibit, and also some modern art. Somebody stuck sneakers onto an orange board and called it art. I guess it's better than a Brillo box, maybe. Alexander Hamilton's New York. The Compromise of 1790 led New York, where Hamilton lived, became the financial center while creating Washington, D.C. as the nation's capital. Now, there is a scene in Hamilton where basically Hamilton tells Thomas Jefferson, "Look, man," he said, "I like money. I'm keeping the money here. Do whatever you want with the capital. I like money, and this is where the financial capital is going to be, New York." Hamilton played a central role in New York's development long before he was the star of a play. $10 bill, Hamilton. In 1791, Hamilton helped establish the country's first national bank. 1792, Hamilton helped to create the Coinage Act, which established the U.S. Mint and the U.S. dollar. And then, I wonder if they paid the toll. I think they paid the toll to go over the Weehawken. I don't know. Anyway, Aaron Burr was a big guy in New York. Alexander Hamilton was a bit nutty. And, well, there was some insults exchanged, and let's have a duel. We'll go across the river. We'll go to Weehawken. The duel was took place in Weehawken, New Jersey on July 11th, 1804. The sitting vice president, he's the vice president of the United States. Does he have anything better to do? Aaron Burr? Anyway, it's between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, the former Secretary of the Treasury. They didn't like each other very much. It was the culmination of a long and bitter rivalry between the two men. Duels were illegal in both New York and New Jersey. And Aaron Burr was also the vice president. So they went to New Jersey on the cliffs over in Weehawken to have it out. Cause of the duel, disparaging remarks that Hamilton allegedly made about Burr during dinner. Them his fighting words. After they counted 10 paces, Hamilton aimed his pistol at the sky, but accidentally shot the tree branch directly over Aaron Burr's head. Aaron Burr had already assumed position and fired, which hit Hamilton in his left rib cage. Hamilton was carried to the home of William Bayard Jr., where he died the next day. Statue of Liberty said, "Come." Oh, by the way, where is the Statue of Liberty? New York or New Jersey? Who owns the Statue of Liberty? New York or New Jersey? New York. In fact, the Statue of Liberty has her back turned to New Jersey. So, I'm not saying it's making a statement, but Statue of Liberty said, "Come." Lady Liberty is a New Yorker. The Statue of Liberty enlightening the world was a gift of friendship from the people of France to the United States and is recognized as a universal symbol of freedom and democracy. Statue of Liberty was dedicated on October 28, 1886. It was designated a national monument in 1924. And there is Lady Liberty and my wife. Welcome. Ellis Island is right nearby. It's part of the same national complex, Statue of Liberty National Monument. Ellis Island is not very large on the map, but it's an unparalleled destination in the United States history. So much so that back in 1966 or so, you've heard of Herb Alpert, right? In Tijuana Brass. There was a show that they did, a special that they did for CBS, where they allowed them into the decrepit Ellis Island in 1966, where Herb Alpert talked about the history, how people like Irving Berlin came through there and made, of course, his name about a mile away. After welcoming more than 12 million immigrants to our shores, Ellis Island remains the symbol of what the American dream meant, or was the American dream to people of a certain time. And through that door, didn't look that tidy back in the day, but through that door, my grandfather went in, and my other grandfather went in, and my wife's grandfather went in, and her grandmother went in, and they eventually became Americans. And the fight over immigration has been ongoing since the 1890s. Ellis Island was the gateway for over 12 million immigrants to the United States, busiest inspection station in the United States, 1892 to 1954. The island was made part of the Statue of Liberty National Monument in 1965 and has hosted a museum of immigration since 1900. And there are the Twin Towers, and that guy is now 6'1". This is back in the early 1990s. That used to be, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Lower Manhattan, but down there, my father was a television repairman. And one of those streets right nearby was where you got tubes for radios and TVs. I have an old 1951 Grundig radio that just sits there because I'm afraid if I put it on and it blows a tube, where am I going to get a tube? And try to go in the other room where the kids are and explain what a tube was for TV. They will not know. They will not know. But anyway, it was around there. The worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil, September 11, 2001. The Trinity Church, St. Paul's Chapel, is still there. Somehow it survived the buildings falling down around them. The rear of the St. Paul's Chapel faces Church Street, opposite the east side of the World Trade Center site. After the attack on September 11, 2001, which led to the collapse of the two towers of the World Trade Center, St. Paul's Chapel served as a place of rest and refuge for recovering workers at the WTC site. St. Paul's Chapel, or the Little Chapel that stood as an Episcopalian chapel located at 209 Broadway, between Fulton Street and Vesey Street. It is the oldest surviving church in Manhattan. Alexander Hamilton is buried there. He is buried there. For 8 months, hundreds of volunteers worked 12-hour shifts around the clock, serving meals, making beds, counseling, and praying with firefighters, construction workers, police, and others, massage therapists, chiropractors, podiatrists, and musicians also attended to their needs. The church survived without even a broken window. Okay, there's another view of what is now the World Trade Center site. And another view from East Broadway, and that's now part of Chinatown. I grew up on the Lower East Side. I lived there until I was 8 years old, and that part of East Broadway was not Chinatown in those days. Chinatown was significantly contracted back in those days. And David Hartman's 42nd Street, and right there, Chrysler Building. I don't know about you. My opinion, it is the most beautiful building in Manhattan. Art Deco from the 1930s. May not be all that efficient energy-wise, but it sure looks good. And this is from, well, this is from what used to be Little Italy. Mulberry Street, except Mulberry Street's been condensed to about 3 streets now, and it's been enveloped by Chinatown. So this is Mulberry Street actually looking that way. And of course, this is modern architecture now, the pencil buildings. Pencil buildings, just go straight up. There's nothing of aesthetic value looking at that building other than it goes straight up. And there it is. That's not 42nd Street. That's that building on 57th Street. David Hartman did a few shows on PBS. It was supposed to be called Walking Tour of the Streets. And one of them was going to go from the East River to the Hudson on 42nd Street from the UN close to the Intrepid Museum. It never happened. So I'll take you for a walk. That, of course, is the United Nations. Opened around 1950, still there. And oddly enough, about 2 blocks south of the United Nations is an empty lot, or 3 blocks. And now they're trying to do something in that empty lot to make it look aesthetically pleasing. But there's the United Nations. And this is the Superman building, the old Daily News building. And inside the Daily News building is the New York Tolerance Center, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and Superman building, the Daily Planet, right? It's where Superman, in disguise, Clark Kent, worked with Lois Lane for Perry White, and it's called the Daily Planet, and somehow nobody could figure out that Clark Kent, when I was wearing glasses, and Superman were one and the same. Just never figured that out, especially Lois Lane. Well, that's her problem. The Chrysler Building is there. Chrysler Building, I knew Jack Kent Cooke when he owned the Chrysler Building. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous building. Grand Central Terminal. Who's saying Grand Central Terminal? Jackie Kennedy. Jackie Kennedy. Jackie Kennedy felt that the loss of Penn Station was a loss of a cultural icon in New York in 1963, and they replaced it with Madison Square Garden, which was a good idea, except the arena is terrible, and it's built like a football stadium instead of an arena, and they've always had problems with the seating. So she decided that she was going to be the leader of the campaign to save Grand Central Terminal in the mid-1970s. And yes, she did, and New York is trying to figure out how do we restore or rebuild a Penn Station that looks like that when it was destroyed in 1963. But the building wasn't maintained well, and nobody really wanted to maintain it, so they sold it, and they built Madison Square Garden here. You know, I always wondered, how do psychics never go out of business? They never go out of business. No matter what, they never go out of business. But behind the psychic is the New York Public Library. I'm doing a talk on the 1876 presidential election between Samuel J. Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes, and I'm not going to get into all that right now. But Tilden, who might have won, lost. He had about $6 million when he died. $2 million went to the New York Public Library because he felt that New York needed a world-class library, and because of Samuel J. Tilden, you got that library there. And oh, there's Gertrude Stein, Bryant Park, which is next to the library. Gertrude Stein once wrote of Oakland. There's no there. But there she is with her little statue, and of course to the right is the New York Public Library. The Crossroads of America. How many of you have watched the Dick Clark New Year's Eve special, which I guess has Ryan Seacrest there? But for years and years and years, television, going back to the very early days of TV, has been in Times Square on New Year's Eve. Ben Grauer on NBC in the 1940s and 50s was there. And now it's Dick Clark, and the building over there where the ball is, they dropped the ball. I never understood is it takes 7 hours to load everybody into the pens around the building, and you have to wear adult diapers because you can't go to the bathroom, it could be 19 degrees. It's all cleared out by like 12:12. It's all gone. Where's everybody gone? Where'd they go? But anyway, so there is the crossroads of America. And New Jersey, Hudson. I didn't put a picture in there of the Port Authority. I'm sure you know what the Port Authority looked like. There's some little theaters adjacent to the Port Authority. There's also a tennis court right over there. They give you a Walter Cronkite story. Want a Walter Cronkite story? Okay. There are those tennis courts right behind the Port Authority. And Charlie Osgood, remember Charles Osgood? He was on CBS Morning, and my press club, I guess it's now 4 years ago, pre-pandemic, we were honoring him. He was going to retire, but he didn't know when he was going to retire because he had a knee, he needed a knee transplant, and he was waiting for the appointment to get the knee transplant. And once he got the knee transplant appointment scheduled, then he retired. But he's telling a story about Walter Cronkite and Andy Rooney. Remember Andy Rooney? He's telling a story about that. And he says he's working at WCBS Radio. He's the morning anchor. And once a week there was a tennis match, I guess it was a match, organized by Cronkite. And he was the fourth. Andy Rooney was there and somebody else was there as well. And Walter had this thing about his tennis balls. And Osgood was saying that these were public courts, but there were stands around it. And occasionally the ball would roll under the stands. And Walter would get on his hand. Can you imagine this? Walter Cronkite on his hands and knees crawling under stands to retrieve his tennis ball, which led Andy Rooney to observe, according to Osgood. You never know how a man feels about his balls until you play tennis with him. Anyway, so I met Cronkite twice. Once we talked about his career as an amateur hockey player in Houston, and the other time we talked about tennis. He was into tennis. Anyway, so that's the Hudson River facing New Jersey. Highlight. My father worked at Morgan Post Office when that train actually passed Morgan Post Office and then was abandoned. So it's a ruin. It is an absolute ruin. And then one day somebody said, hey, we got to do something with it. We can tear it down, or we can make it a park, a vertical park. The High Line is a 1.5 million long New York City linear park built in Manhattan on an elevated section of the disused New York Central Railroad spur called the West Side Line. The High Line Park is built on the disused southern portion of the West Side Line, running to the lower west side of Manhattan, and there will soon be the High Line's connection to Moynihan Train Hall, which used to be the old post office, which has been reconverted in lieu of Penn Station. I like this. Stop praying. God's too busy to find you a parking spot. That is innocent. Park fast. Too busy. Way too busy. Lower East Side. Maybe go down to the Lower East Side. May have you been or familiar with the Lower East Side? I grew up there until I was 8 years old. That used to be the best Bialy place in the world. Kosar's Bialys. And now they've expanded. There's another one. They got two of them now. Well, Lower East Side, you can go get some Bialys. The Pickles guys, they moved across the street. See those people there? They were on the tour bus. And the tour bus stopped in front of the Pickle guys. And about 70 people got off the bus. And they're all waiting in line, like those people. They were part of the bus. It was a scheduled tour stop to get pickles. And the Pickles guy, and that place was so small that they decided to move across the street adjacent to Kosar's. But I kept that picture up because it was a tour bus. Welcome to Little Italy. Little Italy. This is fine dining, Mr. Softy. I may even consider this fine dining. Fine New York dining, Mr. Softy. the very best, Mr. Softy, along with that musical interlude, right? That you sit there and they're all over the place. Every other block, they and the Halal guys are both there. You cannot ever go hungry in Manhattan between them and the Halal guys. On the Lower East Side, one of the few restaurants that's still there, Ferraras, on Grand Street. And when I was a little kid, my pediatrician was in that next building, Dr. Forte. And Chinatown. What's the old song? What's better than Mott Street in summer? I'll take Manhattan. That's Mott Street in the summer. Well, it's probably September, but there it is, Mott Street. Fine dining, Katz's. Well, Katz's, somebody was unsure since 1888 or 1889. Katz's is going to survive. They sold the air rights to the building, and they're building over Katz's, and Katz's will be staying downstairs. It was the only way that Katz's could survive. Yoshishimo's Knish Bakery. They have been there since the 1890s. Yoshishimo Knish Factory. Anybody want a Knish? Oh, more fine dining. Devil Dog. Now, have you had a Devil Dog lately? You haven't? Remember the Devil Dogs when you were kids? They were good. But they've shrunk. They've been sold like 44 different times. What I used to put the Devil Dogs in the freezer and freeze them. And I'd have a Devil Dog, ice milk, whatever it was. Coffee cakes too. Coffee cakes, Devil Dogs, Drake's Cakes. Drake's Cakes was not past the Ohio, but well, I don't know, it's a bunch of garbage next to that truck. The Bowery. The Bowery. I am a big Bugs Bunny fan. I love Bugs Bunny. And I first heard about Steve Brody in a Bugs Bunny cartoon called Bowery Bugs. George Raft, Wallace Beery, another one. And man survives leap from the Brooklyn Bridge. The man was Steve Brody, and he owned a saloon on the Bowery. He also was an actor, and he said he was going to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge and survive. Something fell off the Brooklyn Bridge. It wasn't Steve Brody, but anyway, there was the legend, and the man survived leap from the Brooklyn Bridge, 114 Bowery. And in front of a lot of the buildings in the Bowery, there are placards like that explaining the significant, historic significance of these buildings down on the Lower East Side or the Bowery. But Bowery Bugs, that's the first time I ever knew of Steve Brody because of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And you get to ask my wife of this, but I think 90% of whatever I learned in life came from a Warner Brothers cartoon. This is one, Banks were Banks. And you go in this bank, you could still see, they left a little bit open where you could see the dome. And this bank's built like a bunker. It's got walls that big and all that other stuff. It was an HSBC. HSBC, of course, is out of business now, except for Central Avenue in Scarsdale, one of the few HSBC banks that are still there. But you go in there, and it's from a different era. There's a Duane Reade, I guess it's now a CVS down on 6th Avenue, that also is an old bank. They converted old banks into these CVS type places, and the buildings are magnificent. It's just worth going into that place just to see the artwork. They kept the artwork there. And there, of course, is the Empire State Building, and a parade down, that's 4th Avenue actually, then. In Cardston, Alberta, which is right over the Montana border, if you go to Glacier Park and you go into Alberta, there is a Fay Wray Park. Fay Wray came from there. Anyway, Fay Wray and King Kong. What made Empire State Building famous? King Kong, back in 1933. And there it is. And Central Park, which is loaded with statues and reservoir, and places to run, and playgrounds and all that other stuff, Central Park. And there's the Plaza Hotel, where the Beatles stayed when they came in 1964. I think they're converting it now to condos. Everybody who bought that place found out it was a financial drain, absolute financial drain. So now they're trying condos. They're also trying condos at the Waldorf Astoria now. In museums, the Met, museums, and museums. And the American, well, I guess they thought of themselves as Roman, American Museum of Natural History, kind of misspelled, but that's there. In arts and culture, I have a friend by the name of Gabaran, who's an artist from Spain, and this is an exhibit of holding hands, or one of, well, I guess it's an exhibit that my wife is holding the hand. He is an international known artist. We've been friends, don't ask me why, but we've been friends for a long time. And he invited us to the opening of his exhibit, which was in the middle of Central Park, near the Fifth Avenue side. And there he is, Cristobal Gabaran, artist, UN celebration, and it was for the UN. This was a celebration. There was Gabaran, who is out of Spain. And his son is living somewhere in Southeast Asia right now. Central Park again. Now, those buildings, the pencil neck buildings, right? People are complaining because it blocks the sunlight from Central Park South. And they try to stop those buildings, saying, hey, wait, if you're like, you go on 60th Street, you're getting less sunshine when it swings this way in the afternoon because of those buildings. And Museum Mile, in that building, there's a great exhibit of the Gilded Age, of Astor, and Vanderbilt, and Rockefeller, and Jay Gould, and Stanford White, and all those other people inside the building. And my daughter-in-law ran the New York City Marathon, and she said, oh, did you go see the statue of Fred Lebow in there? And I said, statue? I knew him when he was a living person. She said, what? I said, yeah, I knew Fred Lebow. Anyway, so it's part of that museum. And of course the Guggenheim, oh yeah, there's that Mr. Softy truck again in front. I kind of wondered, what would I rather do? Would I rather go into the Guggenheim or that Mr. Softy truck? Anyway, there's Mr. Softy. Oh, the Naked Cowboy. Guys, you got to pay $25 to take a picture with him, you know. $25. And I don't think he ever worried about frostbite because he's out there all year. The Naked Cowboy in Times Square. In the Flatiron Building. Now, ever hear the expression 23 Skidoo? Well, allegedly, somehow, because it's on 23rd Street, 23 Skidoo somehow, nobody knows how, nobody knows the origin of it, but 23 Skidoo means get out of here, and maybe somebody said inside 23 Skidoo, 23rd Street, get on out of there. Tom Carvel. Is there any more New York than Tom Carvel? Yes or no? Tom Carvel, the ice cream guy. I'm going to give you a story about Tom Carvel and George Steinbrenner. George Steinbrenner owned the New York Yankees roughly from 1973 to 2010. And this has to be in the mid-1980s because I was there covering New York Yankee games. And George Steinbrenner and Tom Carvel are at a meeting, and they're at a meeting for the New York City Control and Benevolence Association. And they're going to do some commercials looking to raise money for the PBA, and George is saying, I do that in Tampa, and I'm a member of AFTRA. And Tom Carvel said, well, I'm a member of SAG, Screen Actors Guild, and AFTRA. And I'm well known around here for radio commercials. I don't know how many of you remember the Cookie Plus Tom Carvel commercials with his gravelly voice. And they get into a big fight. I should be the one. I should be the one. I should be the one. So eventually it was decided that Tom Carvel would do the PSAs on radio. George threw him at Yankee Stadium. every piece of ice cream out of there. So the fans revolted. They didn't like the replacement. And Tom Carvel put Carvel back into Yankee Stadium, and George Steinbrenner had to back down after he was in a snit for not doing those commercials. And there he is, Tom Carvel. TV. This is MSNBC. This is up at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And Steve Kornacki, who any of you watch NBC's election coverage, because he's the election guy. Mike Peace has moved on. Rob is now the head of the Connecticut Lottery, and me back in TV. And there is Charles Osgood. That was the night that he was getting honored by us. Oh, and that is my cousin, Jerry Stiller. Remember Stiller Mirror? Him with my kids about 25 years ago. It was the early capital of television, and still maintains a very significant role in television today. Jerry and Ann Mirror, were on the Sullivan Show 36 times. Maybe you watched the Sullivan Show. Want an inside story here, real quick? Well, if Ed was on stage and you saw him do this on TV, he's looking at his watch to make sure the acts are off on time and getting the commercials in. I'll give you another story. Remember Anna Marie Alberghetti, singer? Actually, my wife was in summer stock with her back in the 1970s. Sullivan had something for everybody. He had, Tokyo Gigio for the little kids. He had the bubblegum, I guess, boy bands. The Beatles, actually, a boy band at one time. All that for teenagers, and he had stuff for young adults, and he had stuff for the empty nesters, Broadway stuff. I'll get to that in a second. And for the old timers, he had Jimmy Durante and all those people on for the old timers. So Broadway's dark on Sunday nights. So Ed invited somebody from Broadway to perform on Sunday night some song from the show, or maybe two songs from the show that they were in. And he has Anna Marie Alberghetti on one night. And she does her songs, and the people are not all that impressed with Anna Marie Alberghetti. That's it. So all of a sudden, Ed, the former ring announcer, that's what he did. He was the ring announcer for the Golden Gloves boxing tournament back in the day. Starts going, come on, let's hear it. Come on, let's hear it. Let's hear it. Let's hear it for Ave Maria. Ave Maria, not Anna Marie Alberghetti. Anyway, that was one of Jerry's stories. And I do speak at the Hebrew Home occasionally, and I get to speak in the Jerry Stiller and Mirror Gallery and Theater. And every time I get in there, I said, gee, Jerry, can you imagine me and you together? Jerry's brother was named Arnold, and my father was named Arnold, and his brother was named Jerry. And I said to Jerry one day, were we so poor that we could only afford two names? Anyway, remember the O.J. Ford Bronco, white Bronco chase? Remember that? Two of us are sitting there watching it together, and we can't figure this out. What's the big deal? Anyway. Give my regards to Broadway, George M. Cohan. Remember me to Herald Square. Well, that happens to be in Times Square, but it's not very far from Herald Square. Catskills on Broadway. Anybody see that play? Anybody go to the Catskills back in the day? The Borscht Belt. You never did? You never did? Later on. Well, this guy here, Freddie Roman, was the guy who authored Catskills on Broadway. That's by comedian friend Max Cocelli. And anyway, the Catskills, Malzy Lawrence was in there, and that's where Freddie made all of his money, because she didn't make money up in the Borscht Belt unless you were Myron Cohen. She likes the theater but never gets there too late. That is my daughter, My Fair Lady, which may never close, right? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. Practice. That's how you get to Carnegie Hall. And there they are in Carnegie Hall. Practice. Although I think this group rented out the hall. That is 67 Eltridge Street, Lower Manhattan. And I lived there when I was a kid. So did Ira Gershwin. Ira Gershwin lived in that building. Tin Pan Alley, Meyerhoff, the grocer, was down the street from there. He had a fat thumb. When he weighed something, he weighed more than it should have, so he could get more money. So they claim. But Gershwin and Tin Pan Alley. And then there's also acting. It's Charles Grodin. Chuck, here's an interesting character, Charles Grodin. He tried to write a Broadway play, and he used to invite us down to listen to, for a treatment. Not a treatment, for a reading. And they were so terrible. None of them ever got to Broadway to the point where anybody considered actually putting money up for it. Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center. And Mel Brooks used that waterfall for The Producers, which is one of the ultimate New York movies ever written. And there is the communications capital of the world, NBC, the Rainbow Room on top, the observation deck. NBC was the first commercial radio network in the United States in 1926, and the first commercial TV station was WNBT-TV, Channel 1 in New York. The first show, World's Fair, April 30th, 1939, Franklin Roosevelt, another New Yorker, although he's upstate New York, inviting everybody to the World's Fair in 1939. And also one of the new centers of the world, with Washington in the United States, the two centers in the United States. I'll take Manhattan. I told you, you're never going to go. You just, look at this. You could get pretzels and lamb rice, and then you can get ice cream right next to it. You'll never starve. You may get ptomaine poisoning, but you'll never starve. By the way, who's buried in Grant's tomb? Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Any answer? Who? No, nobody. He's buried in the mausoleum. That is why it's called the General Grant National Memorial, because there is nobody who's been buried in Grant's tomb. And Groucho, of course, who came from the Upper East Side. There is a park called the Marx Brothers Playground, about 93rd Street, 1st Avenue. And I don't know how many of you remember You Bet Your Life, but if he didn't win any money, at the end of the show, he asked you bonus questions, so you wouldn't leave without money. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Until some guy said, nobody. What do you mean nobody? He says he's buried in a mausoleum. There's nobody. And they ended that joke, but they replaced it with, what is the color of George Washington's white horse? That's what they replaced it with. The correct answer, of course, no one. U.S. Grant and his wife Julia are entombed, but they're not buried in the memorial. And Groucho, here it is, the Marx Brothers Playground on the east side, and that is not very far from this place, 91st Street, also known as James Cagney Plaza, all up in that neck of the woods. And you go on the west side, Nevermore. Wolf the Raven, Nevermore. 84th Street, Edgar Allan Poe Street. There you go. And how many of you are Seinfeld fans? Did you watch the show? That my cousin was Frank Costanza. Remember him? Frank Costanza, George Costanza's father on the show? Cousin Jerry. Anyway, the Soup Nazi, the original Soup Man over on 50, I think that's 55th and 8th Avenue. There you go. You don't see too many of those anymore, do you? Well, there's still one or two around. They work, but you got to look for them. But there are still a couple around. Graffiti, the Bronx. That's pretty good graffiti, isn't it? And the 5 train's right nearby, and somebody, I guess, wanted to, I don't know, honor the 5 train. Sports. That is New Jersey, actually. That's the Yogi Berra Museum in New Jersey, and I used to speak there a few times a year with my buddy Yogi. Remember, if you see a fork in the road, what are you supposed to do? Take it. Yogi, said his wife, Carmen. Yogi, you grew up in St. Louis, you played baseball in the Bronx, and we live here in New Jersey. Where do you want to be buried? Surprise me. You better go to that person's funeral because they won't come to yours. Let me see some of them. What time is it? You mean right now? Nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. And of course, it ain't over till it's over. Yogi was a very, very nice man. That's Brian Cashman, who still is the general manager of the New York Yankees. And there's Yogi. How'd you like to own some of those baseball cards? They were all stolen. Every one of those cards was specially made for the museum, and they were all stolen. And we're in the back room there, and Yogi says, "Sit down. Let's eat." And he's looking at me. He's looking at me one day. And he says, "I said, what's wrong?" He said, "You're not going to ask me to say anything?" I said, "No. I figure you'll say it." He said, "Are you not?" I said, "Okay, give me one." And he does. If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And it's not up there with, it ain't over till it's over. Sports, Yankees, the Mets, the Giants, the Jets, the Knicks, the Rangers, Islanders, Nets, Devils, Liberty, NYCFC, Red Bull, St. John's, Seton Hall, New York City Marathon, the Belmont Stakes, U.S. Open in tennis. It's a big sports city, and I am right over here in this picture. The interview there is with Ricky Henderson in the August 4th, 1983 edition of USA Today. I guess it's still available, USA Today, but I'm right there. And I'm right here, too, with Harvey Myerson, who ended up in jail with his partner, Dan Cooper, for bilking clients. This is during the USFL, NFL trial. It is the sports business capital of the United States. And that's my limo. Anybody have a limo driver like that? That's my limo. I'm proud of my limo. $2.90 or $5.80 a day to maintain. Hey, it's my limo. It's my limousine. Brooklyn Bridge. Of course, Steve Brody jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge allegedly, but there it is. Do you know that Brooklyn was a separate city until about 1898? It was a separate city all to itself. And if Brooklyn was a separate city, it would be the third largest city in the United States. The Brooklyn Bridge is a hybrid cable-stayed suspension bridge. It's one of the oldest bridges in the United States. There looks like a Brooklyn Bridge that connects Wheeling, West Virginia to northeast Ohio. They've closed that bridge down because it needs repairs. It's probably the size of this building. But when I saw that bridge, I said, it looks just like the Brooklyn Bridge. It's about 50 years older. Completed in 1883, connects the boroughs of Manhattan and Brooklyn by spanning the East River. The main span is 1,595.5 feet. It was the first steel wire suspension bridge constructed, designated a National Historic Landmark in 1964, National Historic Civil Engineering Landmark 1972. How many of you watched the gluttony contest every year on the 4th of July? Oh, I can see your faces. Can you imagine eating 3 hot dogs, much less 72? Anyway, home of the International Hot Dog Eating Contest, Nathan's, the Wall of Fame, Nathan's Original over at Surf Avenue. The hot dog eating contest, sponsored by Nathan's Famous Hot Dogs, the world's top competitive eaters. 10 Minutes to Glory happens annually on the 4th of July at the corner of Surf and Stillwell. It's televised nationally and internationally. And there's a betting line. You could bet on who is going to eat the most hot dogs, who's going to be the first to throw up, who's going to be all of that, the eating contest. That is the New York City Subway Museum. And all of these subways seem, well, the name seems to be out of business. The Interborough Rapid Transit Company, Interborough, Uptown, Downtown, Independent Subway, the BMT lines. It's all now part of one group. But, that is the museum in Brooklyn, the Transit Museum. Jerry Stiller. Jerry Stiller's father was a streetcar conductor on Delancey Street. The Stillers only are about that tall. And he always wanted to be a subway conductor, but he couldn't. He failed to meet the minimum height requirement. So he ended up being on a streetcar named, I don't know, on Delancey Street. 1898, New York City added Brooklyn, the first subway, 1904. It was built as a separate private, or they were all built as separate private systems that helped bind the city together. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, the city became a world center for industry, commerce, and communication. And Coney Island, how many of you went to Coney Island and were on the steeplechase or the parachute jump? Between 1880 and World War II, Coney Island was the largest amusement area in the United States. Eventually, it was a decline. During 1966, developers tried to revitalize the Coney Island Boardwalk as an amusement area. Fred Trump destroyed Steeple Park's Pavilion of Fun during a highly publicized event that September. Everybody came in with an axe and just axed the steeplechase into pieces. That is Coney Island today, a shell of itself. Fred Trump proposed building a 160-foot high enclosed dome, recreational facilities in the convention center. Rejected. 2012, Hurricane Sandy caused major damage to Coney Island amusement parks, the aquarium, and businesses. Lunar Park, Coney Island, reopened as scheduled on March 24, 2013. Rebuilding of the aquarium started in early 2013 and opened in 2018. That is Brooklyn, except for the people who live there who call it Brooklyn. But that is Brooklyn looking at Manhattan, just a random street in Brooklyn. Anybody have won an egg cream? Good smiles. You know, once, about 6 years ago, I went to a symposium in Manhattan, 45 minutes about seltzer, all about seltzer, and the seltzer bottles and the crates and all that. They don't make seltzer bottles anymore. You got to really look to find a seltzer bottle, and there's, I think, just one guy who's out of Brooklyn who's still making delivery of seltzers to homes. Anyway, so you get a little seltzer, and you put the seltzer in, you put a little Fox's You-Bet, and you got an egg cream. There are no eggs in egg cream, no milk in egg cream. 2-cent plain. That's what this talk was called. 2-cent plain. And people knew exactly what you wanted. You didn't have to say seltzer. All you have to do is say 2-cent plain, and there you go. If you need a good seltzer, chocolate egg cream. And there are the crates. There's the guy who brought his seltzer bottles with him. And all night long, you got 2-cent plain. That's what you got, 2-cent plain. And Spitzer, there you go. Except it didn't really do what it was supposed to do, but there you go. Staten Island Ferry is the best free attraction in New York. Nothing better than the Staten Island Ferry. You go on there, it's a quick ride, but you can go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, take in the New York City skyline. Queens, the World's Fair. Hasn't been a World's Fair there since 1965, but it's Flushing Meadow Park, and that Unisphere had to be rebuilt. If each of the New York City boroughs were an independent city, Queens would be the nation's 4th most populous after Los Angeles, Chicago, and Brooklyn. It is Queens, the most ethnically diverse urban area in the world. 138 languages are spoken in the borough. And, oh, the Mets, that's my wife singing the national anthem at Shea Stadium back in the 1980s. The Mets, the team, as opposed to the Mets, the Met. There are museums in Queens, Kennedy and LaGuardia Airport, Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, Mets baseball, U.S. Open tennis tournament, the Kaufman Astoria Studios, Silver Cup Studios, and Aqueduct Racetrack, which is really now a casino. And not really a racetrack. And look back, 1964-65, New York World's Fair. Do you know that was the playground for Walt Disney? Did you know that? World's Fair? Did you know it was Walt Disney's playground? Yeah, Robert Moses said, try it out. Because he has this new park that he's planning in Central Florida, which eventually will be called Disney World. And Walt Disney decided he was going to try out some stuff, and he fell in love with the Illinois Pavilion. This, whatever it was called, Talking Abe Lincoln. And he liked it so much that he decided, I am going to do every president through Lyndon Johnson at that point. And it would be the Hall of Presidents, and it would go into Disneyland in Disney World. It's a small world. How many of you are familiar with the Small World ride? It was created for the 64-65 World's Fair by Walt Disney in support of the United Nations Children Fund, or UNICEF. The attraction was a huge hit for 2 seasons at the fair, and it was shipped to the Disneyland Park in Anaheim, where it opened May 28, 1966. Bronx Zoo, the Bronx Zoo, still there, one of the largest zoos around. Arthur Avenue. Well, Little Italy in Lower Manhattan may only be about 2 or 3 blocks now, but there's a lot to do in Arthur Avenue. If you're looking for food, that's where you go. City Island. And this is kind of weird, right? The Marina Travel Agency and the Seashore Restaurant and Marina all in the same diner. They're all the same diner. So I guess while you're eating, you could make reservations to go somewhere. But City Island, which is what, about a mile and a half, filled with restaurants, City Island. The Lobster Box. I don't know if anybody, you've gone to the Lobster Box? There you go, the Lobster Box. Yankee Stadium, the Bronx, also the home of the United States' largest metropolitan animal park, the Bronx Zoo, the New York Botanical Gardens. Little Italy, Bronx, the Bronx Arthur Avenue features meat markets, delis, vegetable stands, fish markets, cafes, and restaurants. John Peter Zenger, here in Westchester County. John Peter Zenger, freedom of the press, England. Radio, that's me, it's viewing Jack Kemp, that's actually at Spark Hill, New York, in May of 1979, I was 23. Kemp was running for president. That's a sad picture for me in a lot of ways, because radio is virtually dead in this country. And a 23-year-old, if I was 23 today, I would never have had the opportunity to go one-on-one with a presidential candidate, which I did. In TV, it's me on the Sam Donaldson Show. Well, freedom of the press is an English colony. John Peter Zenger was a German printer and journalist in New York City. Zenger printed the New York Weekly Journal. He was accused of libel by Bill Cosby. Oh, well, not that Bill Cosby, another Bill Cosby. The royal governor of New York, but the jury acquitted Zenger. And down in Mount Vernon, there's that church, which is the only architecture of that era. So they claim that freedom of the press happened here, but it didn't happen there. Old church there. In 1733, Zenger voiced opinions critical of the colonial governor, William Cosby. November 17, 1734, on Cosby's order, the sheriff arrested Zenger. After a jury refused to indict him, the Attorney General, Richard Bradley, charged him with libel in August 1735. Zenger's lawyers, Andrew Hamilton and William Smith Sr., successfully argued that the truth is a defense against charges of libel. Freedom of the press. I'm 15 years old there, interviewing Bob Hyland, who played with the New York Giants in 1972. Last time I saw him, too, even though he operated bars in White Plains, but I have not given up the microphone yet. Freedom of press in the U.S. First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech, of the press, or the right of people to peacefully assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances. And I'm going to leave you in New Jersey. That's the Princeton Art Museum. Okay? Can you tell me why that box of Brillo is worth millions of dollars? It's Andy Warhol. And behind that is a silk screen of Marilyn Monroe. Can you tell me why that's worth millions of dollars? Now, if you went to Costco and you picked up a box similar to that, and it's uncut, how much do you think you could get on the open market for it? A nickel? It's worth millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. And what is it? It's a Brillo box. A Brillo box. And that is New Jersey, George Washington Bridge, overlooking New York, New York. And we leave coming home from Bermuda on a cruise ship as the ship is about ready to go under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge on its way back to Cape Liberty over in New Jersey, which used to be a naval base during World War II. It was abandoned, and the cruise company said, hey, you know what? Why don't we kind of renovate it a little bit, and people can go to Bermuda, or they can go to the Caribbean, or they can go to New England from this old Navy station. And so people are going home, and that is Brooklyn at sunrise. And that is looking over at Coney Island as the sun is coming up. I want to thank you for being a lovely audience. Any questions, any comments? I'm going to kill this light here because I can't